The brown handout in here is the zoning ordinance handout, which is kind of a brief explanation of a zoning ordinance. I think a version of this is also in, some of these handouts, or versions of them are also in your zoning ordinance. We had a section in the back, but some of them have been updated. This is kind of a short handout which just talks about, in basic, what is zoning, what is the zoning ordinance, some things that maybe are important to know, some things that cities can do, some things that they can't do as far as limits, some kind of generic description about zoning. So that again is just kind of for reference. Those two are kind of the basic ones. And then the last three, the pink, the gold, and the blue sheets are kind of probably where we want to talk the most. Zoning administration, we'll kind of go through this one to start and then get into the other two. As far as zoning, there are effectively three responsible groups in a community that have different roles and different responsibilities. Those being the legislative body, which in this case would be the city council. If it was a county, it would be the county board of supervisors. The other two are the planning and zoning commission, which we have most of the P&Z people here tonight. And then finally the board of adjustment. And again, each of those groups has very specific roles and responsibilities and duties in relation to zoning administration. Start with the city council, and we'll kind of go through these fairly quickly. The city council is a legislative body which has the ability to actually adopt zoning, adopt the comprehensive plan. Since it is a zoning ordinance, something that has to be adopted by the city council, they can make changes to the plan and the zoning ordinance, the map. All of those things are things that the legislative body is responsible for. The other thing that the legislative body is generally responsible for is appointing the people who are on this board and the people who are on the board of adjustment. So you have the legislative body, typical of any legislative body, they're actually putting this into law, putting it into effect. The Planning and Zoning Commission is primarily a advisory board to make recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which is a role that you guys have fulfilled for the last several years. We're involved in the preparation of the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance update, which both were updated since these have been on the books for several years. P&Z also has the ability to make recommendations to the city council on changes in the future as necessary, and I think you guys have done that with the map here probably most recently. I don't know if that's completely adopted.
Yes, just the other night.
All in place after a long time. And then to periodically review things as they see necessary, whether that's the map, the zoning ordinance, if things need to be changes as you guys see things go on in the community, the comprehensive plan. Basically, the responsibility of this group is strictly to make recommendations. Unfortunately, you have no actual authority, which is different from the city council and the board of adjustment. Since the city council has that ability, what's that?
We know.
Okay. Now that doesn't mean that it's not an important board. Obviously, it's the role of this group to really look at zoning and land use and planning and things in the community, because obviously the city council has a whole slew of things on their plate to deal with. Ideally, they're going to want to respect, the decisions and the studying power of this group and take those recommendations seriously. The final group is the board of adjustment. The board of adjustment has three basic responsibilities. Different from the council in that they don't have the ability to change zoning, change the intent of the zoning ordinance or anything like that, but they do have the ability to make some decisions that cannot be overturned by anybody else other than a judge or a court of law.
Even the council?
That's correct. The council has no ability to overturn decisions by the board of adjustment.
I didn't know we had that kind of power.
Feel the power, Jim.
Yeah.
That's true. The only thing a city council does have the ability to do is to place a stay on a decision of the Board of Adjustment for a period of 30 days. So if the Board of, and we'll talk a little bit about these, but if the board would say grant a variance, city council didn't like it, they could say, we're going to put a stay on that variance for 30 days. Now the Board of Adjustment could say, well, maybe we should go back and reconsider, and they could do that. Or they could say, we're not going to do anything, and in 30 days, our decision will become final. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the actual Board of Adjustment handout. But the three, the three duties of the Board of Adjustment, number one is the power of interpretation. If there is a reason why they shouldn't be here. It isn't important, and it doesn't happen very often where the Board of Adjustment has to meet fortunately. They are, kind of a limited board, an as-needed board, as Adam said earlier. They do have the ability to interpret the zoning ordinance if, say, there's a disagreement between the zoning administrator and a citizen as far as how something is interpreted. The Board of Adjustment is the one who gets to determine who's right. So, kind of maybe acting as, in some ways, a court, a referee, if you will. Somebody says, well, I read it this way, and the zoning administrator says, well, I read it this way. They can take it to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment can sort it all out. Not necessarily a fun job, but that's a responsibility of the Board of Adjustment. Yeah, is the
But
state
they're
here,
limited in scope, aren't they, of the things that they can,
as far as,
it seemed like that in previous information, they listed a bunch of things that the
and we will, yeah,
Board
and
of
we'll get into that.
Adjustment could act on, and a lot of things they can't act on.
Well, right, and this is just as strictly
Yeah.
interpretation. If I
Okay.
read it as, one thing, and that isn't something that's going to happen very, very often.
No.
Hopefully, most of the things that are in zoning ordinance are fairly clear. But, if there's something that, boy, that's worded funny, or, there's really a question of, a citizen says, that's just not the way I interpret it, and they want to effectively tell the zoning administrator, I want to interpret it a different way, the Board of Adjustment is the one that's going to sort that out. Which is something that they have the ability to do. Number 2 is the power to grant exceptions. There are a number of, and I don't like the way these are ordered, but there are a number of places in your zoning ordinance where there are special exceptions that are listed. For example, I think everybody has, if you look in any of the, for example, districts, the residential districts,
What page are we on?
actually you can go to any of the districts, but we'll say 2.2 at the bottom. We'll just look at R1 as an example, which is a pretty good place to start. There are those things that are permitted principal uses. These are things that would be the main use on a piece of property in that district. Obviously, single-family dwellings, any of the things that are listed here would be permitted as a principal use in the district. Permitted accessory uses, which are things that, as long as there's a principal use, say you have a house, you could also have one of these accessory uses, a garage, a fence, a satellite dish, a swimming pool, a small kennel for your dog, something like that. Those are 2 things that anybody would come in and be able to apply for a permit, provided they met the requirements of that section, the setbacks and the height requirements and things like that, they could do that. We also have the 3rd column, which is special exceptions, and these are things that people can do as long as they meet those specific requirements, and they take that to the Board